All right, let's jump right in. Here's a question for you. How is it possible that one of the most famous people on the entire planet, a guy who literally walked on the moon, could find himself feeling totally powerless in Washington, D.C.? That's the fascinating paradox of Buzz Aldrin's life after Apollo 11 that we're going to unpack today.
And Aldrin felt this disconnect in a really personal way. It all comes down to this one quote from him. Once again, they were using me. And that came from a very specific incident that just perfectly captures the huge gap between being a celebrity and having real influence. So let's get into that story.
I mean, it's a wild thought, isn't it? The second man on the moon being used. To really get it, we have to dig into what fame actually buys you in Washington, D.C., and more importantly, what it doesn't. So picture this. It's the ultimate photo op. Buzz Aldrin gets an invitation from President Obama's science advisor to join the president on Air Force One. They even tell him exactly where to stand for the cameras. Right there, walking up the stairs next to the president. To anyone watching, it looks like he is right at the center of American power. But, and this is the key part, the second those doors on Air Force One swung shut, the show was over. In Aldrin's own words, he was shunted to the back of the bus while the president was led away to his private office. That chance to actually talk policy, to push his own agenda for space exploration, poof, it was gone. For the White House, the picture was the only thing that mattered.
And that whole story really brings us to our first big idea here. Fame, well, it just isn't power. Okay, so if fame isn't power, then what's really going on? Well, to get it, you have to understand this kind of invisible social structure that Buzz Aldrin was super aware of. It's called the prestige pyramid.
Think of it like this invisible ladder. Everybody in Washington just knows who's on top, who's in the middle, and who's at the bottom. And right at the very, very top are the people who make the actual decisions. Famous faces like Aldrin, yeah, they might get an invite to the party, but they rarely, if ever, get a seat at the real table where the plans are actually made. Here's another perfect example. An LA County supervisor decides to create a whole astronaut day. But the real goal, of course, was for him to get his picture taken standing next to the American hero, Buzz Aldrin. It was all about the press coverage. But check out Aldrin's reaction to this. When he was asked to sign a photo for the supervisor, he basically dismissed it as low priority. And why? Well, because his personal photo album, which was a gift from President Nixon, was packed with pictures of him with presidents, with prime ministers, kings, even the Pope. In his world, a county supervisor didn't even register on that pyramid. And all of this leads us right into the heart of what we'll call the Washington game. Aldrin's fame could open any door in the city, but as he found out the hard way, just getting in the room is barely step one. This was the really tough lesson for him. Access is not the same thing as having allies. Sure, everyone wanted to shake his hand, get a photo, and tell their friends they met Buzz Aldrin. But when it came time to actually pony up support and money for his ambitious ideas, like his Mars cycler concept, suddenly nobody was available to take his call. And to really get why, you gotta understand the weird way Washington actually funds stuff. It's this two-step dance. First comes an authorization bill. This is basically Congress saying, yeah, that's a good idea, that program should exist. It's great for press releases, but it doesn't mean anything without step two, the Appropriations bill. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's the bill that says, okay, here's the actual money to do it. See, Aldrin was famous enough to get a politician on board for step one. It made them look good. But without that all-important second step, the appropriations, the actual funding for his incredible visions, was more often than not exactly this, a big, fat zero. No money, no mission. Okay, so this whole struggle for real influence brings us to a story that is, honestly, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. A secret mission to Mars. So get this. We're at a private lunch at the Willard Hotel, a famous spot in D.C., and this respected economist, Dr. Klaus Heiss, slides a confidential memo across the table. He's basically saying, hey, the U.S. space program is in crisis after the Challenger disaster. The Soviets are going to beat us to Mars. We need to do something drastic right now. And the details of this plan, they were absolutely nuts. First, a secret manned flyby of Mars, and they wanted to do it by 1992. The strategy was to have the president announce the mission
only after the crew was already safely on their way. And the crew? You're not going to believe this. Tibetan monks? Yeah. They were proposed because of their supposed psychological stability for what was, let's be honest, pretty much a suicide mission. Now, this whole idea was the complete 180-degree opposite of what Buzz Aldrin wanted to do. Huston's plan was a secret, high-stakes race to beat the Soviets. Aldrin's vision, his Mars cycler, was all about an open, international program that would actually work with the Soviets. Two totally different worlds.
All right, so seeing these kinds of secret plans unfold from inside the room, it reveals a totally different side to this whole story. It's not just about politics. It's about the price of power.
You know, the author of the book we're drawing from, Frank Braun, he was actually in that room. And he describes this incredible moment of realizing that here he was, an immigrant to this new world, and he's listening to these secret plans to travel to another world.
But what he discovered from being inside that pyramid, from watching Buzz Aldrin and feeling it himself, well, it wasn't what you'd think. He realized something really profound, which he put this way. What they didn't tell you was that the higher you rose in the pyramid, the more isolated you became. And this is where it gets really ironic. He says he actually felt happier, more connected, and less insignificant as a powerless kid on the outside looking in than he ever did as an adult walking the corridors of power. Think about that. And that just leaves us with one final big question. You know, Buzz Aldrin's journey through Washington shows that the climb up that pyramid gets you fame, it gets you access, but it really makes you wonder, at the very peak of power, what do you truly gain? And what or who do you lose along the way?